so many resin 3D printer fails that you can't shake a non-hollowed model at it. All that and more, Print Fix Friday, episode 36. Let's get into it. Hey, thanks for joining us on Print Fix Friday, the longest weekly running fail fix video series here on YouTube, specifically for the 3D printing industry. If you're new here, make sure to get subscribed, and hey, leave a like if you think we deserve it. We're gonna start off with quite a few resin failures. I love resin fails because there's always so many different things that can happen with them. But the first one, we've got a crack that's leaking resin, and it's been leaking for a long time. How the heck did that happen? How can we fix it? After that, we move into a resin print that was left alone, unattended to its own devices for 1 year, and kind of exploded with raw resin going all over the place. Then we move into a resin fail that is happening with models not really sticking to the build plate or the supports themselves. From there, we move into a print fail that the individual believes is caused by an air bubble. It's not. And the fix for it probably won't surprise you if you listen to the other two that are here. We then look at a FEP sheet that has seen some things and is time to be replaced. Just like my segue to our sponsor, 3D Musketeers. If you are tired of failing, right? This entire series is all about print fails and how to fix them. And you are just tired of dealing with your prints failing. You can reach out to the pros at 3D Musketeers. We have almost 40 3D printers and over 40 years of experience helping people make awesome every single day. Whether you want to utilize one of the 11 resin printers that we have or over 20 FDM printers to help your projects come to life, we here can help that be possible. And we recognize that not everyone needs help with 3D printing and you just kind of enjoy the videos. We're down for that. We would always appreciate your subscription and a like as well. But if you do want to kick a couple of bucks into that creator fund so we can make better videos more often with nicer equipment, you can do so by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/3dmusketeers with tiers starting as low as $1, or you can click the join button right below this video and help us out with a YouTube channel member support. But if you don't want to do any of that and you do want to submit some of your own fails, you can do so by tagging us on all the social medias as well as using the hashtag PrintFix, where we go through and we look to see who submitted some stuff so we can take a look at it in the videos. And a big shout out goes to Chris Catlett, the guy that is basically single-handedly giving me all the fails to this video. Thanks, dude. You make my life a lot easier. I appreciate it. Now, let's get back into those fails. Leaky print. Hey y'all, I'm new to resin 3D printing. So far, most of my prints have been successful, but I got my first leaky print. You can kind of see a tiny crack where resin is oozing out. The model is hollow, but I did not add a hole for drainage. I know, I probably should have. There's your problem. My other hollow prints have not leaked, but now I'm wondering if it's only a matter of time.
It is.
The print behind the one I'm holding in the photo was a failed print, bad leveling, and it was leaking. But after I let it sit out for a few days, it kind of dried out and stopped, and I was able to cure it. But the head I'm holding has been leaking for about a week now. It seems nonstop. I was wondering, is this print just trash, or can I fill the crack it's leaking out of, cure it, and go on painting it like normal? And two, how do I prevent this going forward? I know I should add drainage holes, yep, but I guess I don't really know how. Is just one at the bottom of the print good? How big does it need to be? I think I was also hesitant because even with a hole, you're not going to be able to cure the inside of a hollow print, right? So won't it always be wet in there anyway? Thanks in advance. All right, so we've determined it's a hollow print without drainage holes, which is why it's leaking, right? We know that. We know that for sure. There's a tiny crack, which is why it's leaking out, and I'm betting there's a fair bit of volume there, which is going to make this a bit of a pain in the ass. So what you can do here is go get a drill, the drill bit. Be careful, because again, resin is toxic, and just poke a hole in it. You're gonna have to probably poke two, because you need one to let the resin out and another one to let air in. When you're designing hollow models and you're hollowing models out, you want your holes to be at least, in my opinion, 3 millimeters. The reason for this is you can get LEDs as small as 3 millimeters that are still easy to work with. And you can get some tiny 3 millimeter LEDs on some thin solid core wire, that way it doesn't really bend, connect it to a coin cell battery, and push it up into your part to cure it. That is how you cure the inside of resin parts. But reasonably, put a hole as large as you can. Now, if you're using Lychee Slicer, I believe hollowing is only on the paid version, but that's what I have, so let's take a look at Lychee real quick. All right, so inside of Lychee Slicer, we are using Lychee Slicer Pro or Lychee. They say Lychee, I say Lychee, but apparently it doesn't matter. We're gonna grab a model since it was something that we recently just did. Let's grab the Saruman bust from Photon Mint. Now, this one is pre-supported by the master, in my opinion, of resin supports with his Charo Zuck. He really knows what he's doing. And you can see here, lots of holes. Now, Charo does not put any at the top here. I prefer to have one toward the top of the head, but what Charo does instead is he has them in multiple areas along the print. So you end up with enough air volume eventually. You will have a little bit where you've got some suction, but it's not that big of a deal at the end of the day. But yes, hollowing prints is incredibly valuable because, well, it saves you on resin, and we like that. So if we take a look here, we can see that, yeah, for the most part, you're not really dealing with any suction cups. Immediately, we start with 2 holes. Again, this is to let resin out and air in. You can see the entire inside just looks really nice. No supports needed on the inside, which is always convenient. But if we look at the raw model itself, which actually appears to be, yeah, it is. It's larger than the resin version. That's funny. I'm guessing this is scaled to fit some of the smaller resin printers. But if we look at this bust, it is completely solid. So if we utilize the hollowing feature, we can set where we want our holes to be. Now, we're doing 18 millimeter diameter, so a big hole. So we can cut that down to whatever we want. Let's go to like 6 millimeters. We're going to penetrate 2.9, which is fine. We're just going to toss them all over the place where we've got the room to do so. Then we're going to come into hollowing 3D. Thickness, I'd go at least 2 millimeters for this. And then we can add an update. And now we can see very quickly that the inside of the model has been completely hollowed. And we've already got our holes in there. And so when you go to print this, you're not going to deal with any issues with suction cups. Quite frankly, I'm surprised this print even succeeded because you have a big freaking suction cup there that you're dealing with. So I don't know. You apparently have your printer settings dialed in quite well. But yeah, I would look at utilizing something like Lychee Slicer Pro or another 3D slicing software for resin, where you are able to hollow it and then put your drain holes in. Again, you want at least 2. I prefer them to be at least 3 millimeters in diameter. Makes life a little bit easier when you go to cure it, and just use a 3 millimeter UV LED. You can get some from Amazon. If I find something I like, I'll link to some in the description. And if you're especially fancy, you can also just use a 5-volt power supply with a resistor or something like that to get down to the 3.3 volts that most LEDs need. By the way, thanks to Chris Catlett for this one. This is a really awesome fail that I'm sure a lot of people that are new to resin printing aren't aware of. So thanks, Chris. I appreciate you helping us out by tagging us on social media and utilizing the hashtags PrintFix. I appreciate it. And to prevent this kind of issue going forward, yeah, literally add drainage holes. Problem solved. Hopefully that little tutorial in Lychee works. I will put the link to the video for this person, and if they need more help, I'll set up a private meeting with them because I like doing those kinds of things. Has anyone ever seen this happen? We've got a model that's cracked into a few pieces. Let's see what the poster says. It's down here a bit. I'm still new to posting on Reddit, so I'm just going to leave a comment to give more detail. I bought this miniature from a seller on Etsy in February of last year. When I got it, it looked like it was in pretty good shape, and the leg was hollowed, so I could tell there wasn't any liquid resin inside. I put most of it together with super glue. I filled some gaps with green stuff, primed it with Krylon gray spray primer, and then it sat on a shelf for about 6 months before I started to paint. I painted most of it, but then had to take a break, which ended up being another 6 months. I feel that. It was in the basement the whole time, so pretty stable temperatures and humidity, and did not get exposed to sun. So earlier today, I decided to start painting it again, but the leg looks like it exploded. And there was liquid resin all over the bottom of this plastic tote it was sitting in. Has anyone ever seen this? What could cause resin to separate like this or decure? That's not possible. And is the rest of the miniature in danger from coming apart like this? So let's dissect what we have going on here. We've got a resin model that has just kind of split and cracked over time. I would guess this is a plant-based resin or one of the eco resins. As much as I like things that are environmentally friendly, the plant-based and eco resins don't seem to be working as well as regular hardcore resins do. And while, yes, even the water washable resins are still toxic because resin is toxic, they don't stop curing. And especially if you have raw resin inside of your part, hilariously like the one we talked about previously, eventually it's going to find its way out. What likely happened here is that some sort of UV exposure got to it and it got hot. The other thing that can happen is over time, we're seeing a lot of stress in these water washable eco and plant-based resins that will eventually cause the model to split. Now, why this thing kind of looks like it exploded, I'm guessing somebody dropped it and didn't want to tell you. I could be wrong here, but that does not look like that just happens over time. And resin does not decure like this person says. And I agree, they didn't drain, wash, and cure the model correctly. Resin cannot decure. It is a photopolymer resin. The exposure to UV light catalyzes the resin and makes it unable to go back to its regular liquid state. Because if it did, and it was possible, oh my gosh, I would love this industry so much more because I am tired of having so much failure and waste when we deal with resin fails. There's no easy way to fix this model. It is effectively trashed. And while it is a year late, it would be a decent idea to contact the seller and just let them know. It's not their responsibility at this point. You've had it for a year as far as I'm concerned, but this isn't good practice. Most likely here, even though the model was hollowed, it wasn't properly cleaned and drained of all the raw resin. Therefore, some of it over time just decided to start curing on you. We have someone here saying that you don't need to cure the insides, and this is not correct. No matter how well you wash the inside of a hollowed model, some resin residue will be left. If you do not cure the inside, it will off-gas eventually, leading to the outcome OP experience at the worst or oozing at best. A few UV LEDs and a battery are cheap. Do it the right way. Freaking men. Then we get into a bit of a Reddit argument, and this individual's actually producing a fairly substantial argument. I have to agree with them that curing of the resin does not off gas, but the heat will carry more of the fumes and stuff with it, so you're more likely to smell it then. I don't know for sure. I'd have to ask my buddy Paul, who we interviewed in a previous video where we talked all about the dangers of airbrushing resin and how photopolymer catalyzes the way that it does. We'll card that video so you guys can take a look. It is cut down quite a bit, and the Patreon version is the entire length of it, which is actually a pretty good video, I think, if you like listening to people that are turbo geniuses on very specific subjects. But I do like what we have going on here, right? It wasn't, I was expecting a Reddit argument. It was more just clarification. And I agree with the statement here. The usual case for cracking and oozing is when a model was hollowed with no drain hole. An easy mistake to make. The resin is incompressible because you cannot compress a fluid. This can lead to increased pressure, and add a little that formula. As temperature increases sometime in the future, V has to, this is math, and yep, it's true. They're basically saying that it increases pressure because yada yada, math and stuff. I happen to agree with Mark Leptic here. I believe that Chris is also correct, and that maybe they should have clarified that curing the insides is good, but is not technically necessary, which is true. It's not technically necessary, but it is the best way to do it because, again, it does overall reduce the unevenness of the stressors. Why does my Mono X hate me? Info in comments. Okie dokie. I just cannot get this thing to cooperate. I bought it a month or two ago and got a couple of decent prints out of it. But since then, it's been failure after failure. I totally understand this. And if you are going through this, don't forget, we have 11 resin 3D printers here at 3D Musketeers, and we're happy to help you out when the need arises. I assume that it was something to do with the colder weather. That's a good point, and it could be. So I made a heated enclosure for it. This baby sits at a solid 28 to 30 C, and I'm still getting these failures. Have you recalibrated your exposure for that extra heat? When you change temperatures of resin, it can quite a bit affect your exposure times. I've tried medium supports, I've tried large supports, I've tried upping my exposure time to 2.5 rather than 2. I've tried upping my UV power to 80% then to 100 rather than the recommended 60%. I've tried different files, I've tried fewer models on the build plate. I have replacement FEP on the way just in case that's contributing somehow. I doubt it, but I don't think that it is. The failed prints peel off quite easily when I clean up. Does anyone know what I could try next? So whenever we run into failures like this, I always say, look at your build plate. 1, make sure it's level. We talked about this in resin printer maintenance. We'll card to that video so you guys can take a look, but make sure that plate is level against the FEP. You also want to make sure that you're running an exposure test. This will help you better understand where your exposure needs to be for that particular material. You might be underexposing it, which I'm guessing you are based on the fact that these aren't looking all that great. I have a Photon Mono X. I've actually rarely used it. If someone local to Tampa Bay is looking for a Photon Mono X, hit me up. I'd probably be willing to get rid of it at this point because we're pretty comfortable with the Elegoo brand. But either way, I think this is exposure related. We can look at also making sure that there's nothing on that FEP, right? Run a soft silicone spatula or something that's brand new, obviously only for resin. Do not use it again for food. Through your vat, make sure there's no extra crap hanging out in there. And then make sure your plate is, of course, re-leveled and clean. Once you go through that, run the exposure test. The one I've really been enjoying lately is the one from Table Flip Foundry, who's going to be an upcoming podcast guest because they heard the call out in the last video and DM'd me on Discord. They slid into them DMs, and I enjoy that. It's always fun to call out creators and then see how long it takes them to have one of their fans get the message to them. So I'm excited to have them on to talk about what it was like to build that exposure test. But yeah, run some exposure tests, make sure that plate is clean, make sure it's level, and I think you'll be doing well. When you are dealing with added temperature inside of your resin printer, you are going to have to affect your cure times. By the way, we are working on a product here that is going to solve a lot of those cooling and heating issues for resin printing, and I'm working on a high temp version that's going to work great for FDM too. Not that I have a working prototype that totally works, that I'm really excited for. So if you guys do want information on that, make sure you get subscribed. And if you are a patron and you are in our Discord, you're actually getting to see some behind the scenes of me working on this project when we have the time. So hoping sometime in the summer we'll be able to release it, get some out for beta, and have the full release just in time for the fall and winter season. So get subscribed because we're going to be talking more about it as it gets closer to being a reality. Partial failure caused by an air hole. Help. Okay. That is not caused by an air hole. Actually, I think your screen is borked. Let me see. Do those lines go all the way through your print? Because I'm betting your screen is borked. We also can see the model is red, and red inside of Lychee Slicer means that it is not watertight or manifold. That means there's some errors on the model itself. And thankfully, they've got a built-in system that takes care of a lot of those problems for you, but still something to be aware of. This person is saying the hole should have been made at the bottom of your print. My rule of thumb is I check the first few layers. As soon as I see a void being printed, I punch a hole at the same level to help relieve the void, and that is enough for the entire print depending on the size. The hole you made at the top will only help the encased resin to fall out if there is any, but they don't see a reason for it. But what we're seeing is some holes in the back. I think they're concerned about this stuff here, which I have a feeling has to do with the fact that the model is not perfectly clean. I don't think the air hole is your problem. The failures, to me, are related to the fact that your model isn't in good shape. The other thing we can look at is, yes, make sure that when you have a hollow model and you're putting an air hole in, you kind of need them all over. Otherwise, you're going to create some suction forces. Like we saw previously, if you utilize just a few down here at the bottom, you can get the entire print to drain at the end. Now, personally, like I said before, I like to put one up near the top. That way the resin drains out before I take the part out of the printer. But in things like this Saruman bust, yeah, that would ruin the bust. So I totally understand going through the little bit of extra work for something like this. But also make sure you're running your print through the fixing algorithm in Lychee Slicer. That will assist in making sure you don't have these problems again. I would also look, because these holes seem very, very straight, I check your screen. I don't think it's the screen, but if you still see holes like this, and the print is resolved and you see it in other prints, you got a dead screen, and it's time to replace it. Is it time for new FEP, new to resin 3D printing? I think we're talking about that little gouge. Oh no, it's not the gouge. I think these are little holes. What the heck? What am I looking at? Yeah, I didn't even notice. I thought we were looking at that one little crease. I didn't notice what all looks like little bits of resin. The nice thing is FEP is pretty easy to replace. We did a whole video on it. We'll card so you guys can take a look at it. In a case like this, I would look at trying to clean those little bits of resin off the FEP, and then honestly, I would just send it. Like, I'm the kind of person that's just gonna send it, and if it fails again, it fails again. It's no big deal. But it is good practice to make sure that you check your resin before every print. Make sure that you don't have any little extra bits of cured resin inside of your vat, because it will jam it into the FEP, and if it is a large enough piece, it can actually damage your screen, which of course none of us want that. That's expensive. The screen is literally the expensive part of resin 3D printers, and hilariously is also what makes them disposable, because the cost to replace the screen a lot of times comes out to basically half the cost of the printer. And when you add in the amount of labor that it takes, it doesn't always make sense. But yeah, I'd replace the FEP. If you are leaving your resin in the vat, also make sure that you're stirring it well. If you don't stir your resin, the pigment will settle out to the bottom and it will cause some issues on your first couple of layers. It's a good thing to note there as well. But that's all I got for you guys today. Let me know down in those comments what you think of these fails and my fixes for them. But stay safe out there. Don't forget to call your loved ones. And as always, keep making awesome. Have a good one. Hey, thanks so much for watching this video, and a massive thank you goes out to all of our Patreon and YouTube channel member supporters whose names are scrolling right next to me at the $5 tier and higher. Remember, if you want to get your name amongst the elite Musketeers, you can do so by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/3dmusketeers with tiers starting as low as $1. And as always, right below me will be the entire PrintFix Friday series, and next to it will be the printer maintenance series. It's time. It's time. I'll see you guys down in those comments and in the next one. Take care.